Call the out of recess Lee County petition number 201555 Stewart Creek Solar LLC's request for a special use permit to construct a solar energy system in portions of Alto and Willow Creek Townships. For the record, present this evening of note are Chairman of the ZBA, Mr. Forster, then ZBA members Burrow, Oakley, Pratt, Hughes. I do not see, unless I not craning my neck very well, I do not see Mr. Meyer. Okay. Wonderful zoning officer D. Duffy is present, as is the astute state's attorney, Mr. Boonstra. Ms. Kennedy for the petitioner, along with some of the petitioner's agents. Zach from the Lee County IT department is present, as is Ms. Henkel. Our long-suffering court reporter is with us, and 1, 2, 3, 4 interested parties at this point appear. That makes the population of this room 4, 7, 8, 10, 14, 17, 18, I think 21 people present, which conforms with the governor's mandate. Who knows? Pretty soon we may be shut down entirely, but we'll see. There are no people, correct, in either the first floor lobby or the back jury room. Is that correct, Ms. Duffy? For those listening, obviously, if you're listening on Zoom, you already know this, but if you happen to be listening on YouTube, the Zoom meeting ID remains 915-3923-9154, and the password is 209840. At the YouTube, you can watch us by going to www.youtube.com. In the search bar, type in Lee County IL for Illinois, Zoning Board of Appeals, all written out. No need to be concerned with upper or lowercase letters. Then there should be a list of dates. Select the date you want. Today is the 20th of October, and voila. Anybody needing technical assistance, feel free to call for that technical assistance, 815-973-3449. All right, that brings us up to speed. And when we left off before calling the last recess, Ms. Kennedy, we had a witness on the stand, Mr. Lear, and she had finished direct examination. And we were about to begin cross-examination of Mr. Lear. I see Mr. Lear on the Zoom. Mr. Boonstra, questions of Mr. Lear?
No questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Duffy, how about you? Questions?
No, I don't.
Really? Okay. Members of the ZBA, Mr. Forster, questions of Mr. Lear?
No.
How about you, Mr. Burrow?
No.
How about you, Mr. Bothy? Mr. Pratt? Sure. And Mr. Lear, make sure you tell us if you can't hear. I'm sure you will. But
yes, I can hear you very well right now.
you can hear me because I'm swallowing the microphone, but it's tough.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Wonderful.
Okay.
Mr. Lear, do you design where and position where the panels will be? Is that part of your responsibility?
No, that comes from the EPC contractor. The way that process works is I will help put together the construction plan as we discussed last night. And then the EPC contractor will design the project and then buy the material and install the project.
EDC.
EPC, I'm sorry, it's engineer, procure, and construct type contract.
So who does design? They have an engineer that positions the panel?
Yes, depending on the contractor you get, some of them have design people in-house. If not, they would subcontract that out.
So how will they get power from the north project to the collection point without going through non-participating owners or parcels?
So the way the solar project will work is the DC power that will come off the panel will go to an inverter. That'll change it to AC power. And the AC power would be routed underground up to the substation where the main power transformer is. So all the power from the entire site, the north, central, and south portions, will have underground power cables that will go up to the substation. That's where they tie into the interconnection point on the grid.
But surely they will have to pass through non-participating parcels with them underground cables.
If they do, there would have to be easements put in place to allow that.
So what about the tile that they, if there are non-participating, the tile guy talked about everything on the project. Now we're talking about non-participating parcels. The tile are not discovered there. So is that your responsibility or somebody else's?
I can't speak directly to that. That would come from the owners. My guess would be if they did hit tile as they were going through the easement, I would assume before you went through the easement, that would be mapped, just like the project site. So you'd know ahead of time if you were going to hit a tile, and you would move that drain tile so you can pass through that easement. But if they did hit an easement, I would let the owners respond to that, but I assume they would fix that and repair that tile.
What percentage of the 5,000 acres will actually have panels on it?
I believe the site is actually a little bigger than 5,000 acres. I believe or at least the land that's allocated to this. But the 5,000 acres minus the setbacks, the county requirement setbacks, will pretty much all be used for put the solar panels in. So percentage-wise, it would be 98, 97%.
Okay, no further questions.
Okay, thank you. I think we've run through everybody's interested party. Mr. Hughes, thank you. I got to start going boom, boom. It's probably just because I'm sitting off on the side here. You're kind. Go ahead. Mr. Laird, I have a few questions. When you were giving testimony earlier, you were talking about a receiving area or what I would call a laydown yard. Is there going to be a central laydown yard, or I'll leave it there. Is there going to be a central laydown yard?
In a manner, there will be to start the project. The way with the project being phased, so the way it would work for the material receipt and laydown, the material would come in. So on the north phase, with that project area just being the first one, there would be a designated storage area for when the material comes in. We go to that area, and then as the project progresses, even in the north area, as it progresses south, then the material would be staged from that central area out to where it is in the north area. Then as the project progresses to the central portion and to the south portion, there'll just be a receiving, everything will be received probably again on the north side of the north area of the site. Once it's received and inspected, that material would go directly out to where it's needed in the central and south project. So as the project progresses, since it's such a large site, the material doesn't get stored in just one spot. It will get staged out very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Approximately what size will that laydown or receiving area be?
The initial area up front, when they first start, would not be real big. You know, it might take up an acre. What you'll get is the posts for the piles that are coming in will come in, so you'll need some room for that. And some of the solar panels will start to come in. So it's not going to be a huge area. It's probably an acre or less.
Okay. You also stated that there probably wouldn't be any primary parking area, just like there's not a true laydown yard. How would the parking be handled as it moves through the different stages?
So initially there would be a kind of a central parking area. That'll, again, it would be on the north side of the site. So what will happen is construction trailers, temporary trailers will be brought in, and a parking area will be established right by those construction trailers. So when the project first starts, there may be 80, 90 people on site, and they would all park in that initial central parking area. Then as the project progresses down to the south, smaller parking areas will be designated at certain portions of the project. And those will be really dictated by the construction contractor as he sees fit to allocate his people out. So you wouldn't have everybody, once the project is at its peak, let's say crews coming out to the site, you wouldn't have everybody coming to that central parking area. You may have some coming to that, and the other people, as they would go to the parking areas designated for the areas that they're working in, and they would move, their parking areas would move as they went south on the project.
All right. And you indicated that there would be construction trailers or operations trailers.
Yeah, there'll be temporary construction trailers. They would come in at the start to give the construction management people a place to work. And then they would stay throughout construction. And then when construction's done, those trailers get taken away. And if there is a small O&M building, which I don't believe has been decided at this point because the project will be controlled off-site, so there really isn't a need for any long-term permanent structure at the site. I don't know that that's been finalized, whether there will be a little O&M. It would be just a small little trailer, basically, if there is one.
Okay. And then am I to assume that those operational trailers, construction trailers, will also move as you go through the different segments of the construction or the different areas, the north, the central, the south? Will they move as well?
No, they typically don't, even on large projects like this. Once they establish the location for that, the construction trailers, they stay there throughout the duration of construction.
Okay. Then how much area will those construction trailers and that initial or primary parking area, how much acreage will that encompass?
It would probably take up maybe an acre and a half, 2 acres, something like that. The construction trailers are the modular type, kind of a double wide trailer. And there might be 2 of those in a large project like this. And then you would have the parking. So yeah, maybe up to 3 acres, probably at most.
Okay. Will that area be gravelled as well?
Yes, the parking areas would be gravel.
And after the construction is done, what will be the process of bringing that area back to original condition?
The final methodology would be decided with the construction contractor, but there's really two real options. Is the trailers would obviously get removed from the site, and they really don't leave any telltale signs. I mean, they get anchored down and They're usually supported on some cinder blocks. All of that would get removed. So the thing you'd be left with would be the gravel parking area.
Yes.
And sometimes those stay. Again, it's kind of an owner's call at the end. The gravel parking area would stay if there was a use for it during the long-term operation. But since this project wouldn't really, would be controlled remotely, there wouldn't necessarily be a need for that. So then the gravel would be removed at that time, and that area would be restored back to kind of its native, grasses would be planted and so forth to stabilize the soil.
Okay. You mentioned, and we've talked about the timeline on the construction of a variety of times. And it's kind of a moving target, I guess, but you also mentioned that there's more to the timeline than just the construction period. But I'd like to get maybe a handle on what the time frame of actual construction in each phase is, not the stuff leading up to it, not the preparatory, but just the actual on-site for each segment.
The on-site construction would be actually about 21 to 24 months.
Okay, that is, okay. Okay, I thought in your earlier testimony, you had indicated that 21 to 24 months would includes other things, preparatory things and that type of thing. So I just wanted to get a better handle. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
I was alluding to the overall schedule, had things that came up front up to construction. So if that was confusing, but I apologize. But the actual construction duration is the 21 to 24 months approximately. So
then am I to assume that each segment would comprise about 7 to 8 months?
Yeah, that's probably a fair assessment. Typically on projects like this, the progression increases, the labor productivity gets better as the project goes on because the people that you have working become acquainted with exactly how to install it. So it's a learning curve and then it picks up. But yeah, a good rule of thumb would be a third of the time would go to each of the phases.
Okay, thank you. Going a little bit more toward the actual solar panels. We've had a couple of significant tornadoes in Lee County in the last few years, and in August we had they call it a derecha, winds up to 100 miles an hour. What's the what type of force or impact can solar panels take?
The solar panels, if they get impacted, they would probably crack, whether with rock or debris or twigs or tree limbs, depending on how hard they hit the panels. The solar panels are made of tempered glass, so when they get shattered, they don't shatter like regular glass. They would crack, kind of more like your car windshield. The site, when the engineering is done for the design for the piles, the racking, all of that takes into account the maximum wind loads for the site. And so every site is different. So whatever the wind loads for Lee County would be, those would be used in the design for the facility. So the trackers and the racking and the piles should stay in place for those maximum wind loads, but the panels could suffer some damage based on impacts.
Okay. And I think just one more question for right now. It was indicated in the application that they're looking at lithium batteries, Samsung batteries for backup storage. But then it was also stated that may be dictated by, excuse me a second here. PJM as to whether they're actually needed or not, but what type of storage or what type of mounting would those require?
So the battery backups for utility grade type plants, they would be pretty much anymore, they're all lithium based batteries.
What type of containment would they have? Are they on a cement slab? Are they housed in a building? How do they get set up?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways you can do that. They would be housed inside. They wouldn't be outside, obviously. So there are some systems where the containment is in a kind of like a storage container, and the batteries are in racks. And that would be one methodology where it's inside a metal storage container. The other methodology, the batteries again are in racks, but they would be in a physical building structure that's built for them. Usually the building structure is only built if you have a very large battery capacity. So depending, as you said, with what the PJM requirements are, typically the battery backup power here that I've seen has been more in the metal storage containers.
Okay, thank you. I think that's my question.
Okay, thank you. Alice, does Rex Meyer show?
No.
All right, interested parties in the room first. By a show of hand, questions of Mr. Lee. All right, seeing none, we'll go to the Zoomers. You're going to disappear for a minute, or Alice is going to tell me if we got any raised hands. Folks on Zoom, I know it's boring for me to keep saying it, but if you have a question, Mr. Lear, and you're on video conferencing, move the cursor to the bottom of the screen where it says, I think it says participants. Click on participants. Up should pop a menu that includes raise hand. Click on raise hand and we will see your raised hand on this end. If you're teleconferencing, in other words, you're on your cell phone, stay on the Zoom on the cell phone, but go to your keypad and hit, is it *9 or 9*? *9. Forgot to let it. *9, and that should raise your hand, and we'll see that as well. So I'll give you a few seconds here. Anybody's got any questions? You got 3? Okay.
First.
Allie Huss, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, go ahead, ask away.
All right. So how many years have you worked in the energy development field?
I've got 40 years plus in the energy energy industry.
Okay.
So I've seen all kinds of projects.
And how many years of that would you say have been spent focusing on solar development?
Solar development's probably been over the last 10 years.
Okay. And during that time, have you personally worked with developing the construction for a 5,000 acre plus solar project?
I have worked on construction management plans for projects that size.
Okay.
Yes.
And how many have been of 5,000 acres or more?
There's been 2 that I've worked on that have been this size.
Okay. You also mentioned road use agreements in your testimony. Will those be available for the public to view?
I believe so. I'm not sure the process right now on that. I know the agreements are made between the townships and the county as well as the owner. I guess I can't answer that directly. I don't know for sure.
In the road use agreement, if road improvements are necessitated, will your construction company be doing that, or will that be the responsibility of the township?
Again, it would be dictated by what falls out of the agreement. So However, that gets, if the agreement states that the owner has to do that, then yeah, the construction company would do the improvements. But if the township takes that on, so right now, I don't know for sure which way that would go.
Okay. What is the remediation plan for erosion that does happen during the construction?
So the first thing that will happen is they'll come in and do the initial grading on the site, and then they'll put up the silt fencing to prevent the erosion off the soils off of the site. The roads, the site roads will be graded, and then gravel. There'll be gravel installed on the roads. There would also be speed limits for people traveling on those roads to try to keep the dust down. And in the end, when the project is complete, the construction contractor would go back. If there were any areas that eroded due to, say, heavy rains or something, after construction, they would go back and repair those back to what they were originally.
Okay. You also mentioned additional storm runoff channels, correct?
If they're needed. What typically happens is there'll be a hydrology evaluation of the site, and that'll dictate how the site gets graded and whether there's going to be a need for retention ponds, for storm runoff channels. A lot of times there isn't, but that doesn't mean every site's different. So that doesn't mean there would be or wouldn't be. It just isn't known right now.
Okay. Would these additional storm runoff channels be in easement areas?
Again, without the design, it would be hard to say where they would end up.
Okay. Is your company responsible for installing the perimeter fencing around the solar project?
No, we're not. We're a construction company.
Okay. Will the fence be up prior to you guys starting construction?
Not all of the fence. The way the project will go is the initial areas where the construction trailers go in the parking lot. Fencing will start being installed at that point. So there will be some interior fencing if needed for materials if they're brought on site and the perimeter fence hasn't been completed yet. They'll put up some temporary fencing around materials and so forth.
Okay. Have you observed your construction projects or the construction of a solar project over the span of 5 years?
The solar projects, if you're asking directly about solar projects, there hasn't been a solar project that spanned 5 years of construction. But to answer your question.
No. I mean, have you observed I apologize. Have you observed once the construction has completed 5 years post-construction?
Oh, operation. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. I have gone out to project sites after they've been constructed while they're in operation. I don't know that I visited any that have been in operation for 5 years. I've visited a lot. I just don't recall off the top of my head if it's been, there's been a 5-year period since it completed construction.
What were your observations of the project post-construction when it was, were there any things that came up that you took notes as changed during construction for a next project, or any impacts that had not been foreseen that did happen as a result of the construction project? To answer the first part of your question about what did I observe after construction and the facilities are in operation, they're very quiet. I mean, there's no noise generated. If there are people on site operating, it's only 1 or 2 people. These plants are very self-sufficient. They're not like an industrial plant that you might think about. So it's still very peaceful out there, if you want to put it that way, because these projects are usually out in rural areas like the one we're talking about. As far as lessons learned, usually the lessons learned from what I've seen have not been on the construction side. I mean, The construction contractors, it's not really a lessons learned, but they have over the past 5 or 10 years gotten very efficient on installing these. So they have learned lessons over that time of the best way to stage their crews, how many people they're going to need to install the racks, how many people they're going to need to install the piles. So there's been a good learning curve from the construction perspective for being very efficient out there during construction. A lot of the main lessons learned center around more if there's a shared facilities agreement. I know I might be getting off base here, but usually some of these projects get very complex in where they tie into the grid. And there's a lot of agreements in place between all the different parties that might have that shared facility. That's usually the lessons learned are. They're not out where there's been a big mistake.
Have there been impacts to either drainage tile or soil that was not seen after construction had initially been completed, but later on during operation?
Not that I've seen. A lot of the projects don't encounter, even though they're in farming areas, don't encounter the drain tiles like are on these sites. I would say if a drain tile damage were encountered after the project was up and running, you might see it in that you would start seeing water at the surface if there was water flowing through that damaged drain tile. And although it would be difficult, there might be a way you could repair that potentially. But no, I have not seen that.
Okay. Will your company be involved in developing the deconstruction plan for decommissioning?
There's already a decommissioning plan that's been developed. We were not involved in development of that plan.
So as far as actually undoing the construction of what you are putting in place, your company will not be involved in that?
Well, in the end, I don't know. That hasn't been decided with the owners, but I will tell you there is a decommissioning plan that's already in place.
Has your company or have you been involved in the deconstruction of a solar project?
I don't believe we have. I'm trying to think back. I don't think there have been many that I can think of that have been deconstructed. Now, we have been involved in reviewing the plans, the decommissioning plans, and we have been involved in doing cost estimates and determining the best methodologies to dismantle the plant. But I have not seen any solar plants being decommissioned or deconstructed.
Are you aware of any studies or other accounts that have studied the impact to soil, drain tiles, or erosion during the actual deconstruction process?
No, I'm not. I have not seen any studies of that.
Okay. You mentioned that you don't see any issues on the road use, correct?
Correct, and I believe even the townships have looked at it without having any issues with it.
Are we then to conclude that if there are gravel roads marked as heavy travel areas, that those will no longer be gravel roads?
I'm not sure I follow what you're asking.
The heavy travel areas marked on the map that was passed out, some of those roads are gravel. With all of the construction use and the materials that will be brought in, would those roads need to be upgraded, or are they sufficient based on the weight of the materials?
That I can't answer. More study of those roads and interface with the county and the townships would have to be done to determine if there would be any detriment to those roads. Typically, there is not, but I can't say for sure.
Okay, so what is the weight of the materials per load that will be brought in on average?
Well, you're limited basically by what the trucks can handle. It's mainly semis, and how a lot of the probably the biggest, heaviest piece of equipment that comes in is the transformers. All of the other materials that come in, even the piles on the back of a 18-wheel truck, those loads are very, very small, really. And the solar panels that come in, you're limited by how high you can stack those panels because they come in on pallets. So again, those loads on those trucks are very low compared to typical loads for machinery that those trucks can handle.
Okay, and I do think this next one may have been covered, but he's there in person, so it was a little hard to hear, but forgive me if I repeat this. But so the AC power from the inverters will be transmitted only via underground wire to the substation.
That's the plan right now. I mean, until the final design is done, but the plan is to take it all underground till you get to the substation. There may be something that crops up where you do have to go above ground, but that's not in the plan and that's not foreseen at this point.
Okay, so when you look at other solar projects that do have the equivalent to telephone posts moving some of that's not the design for this project, correct?
It's not the intent of the design. Like I say, the design hasn't been completed or really even started yet, but the initial intent would be to do it underground unless there is some obstacle that causes to go above ground.
Okay, you also mentioned that the panels will be managed remotely. Is that correct?
Correct. The plant will be operated remotely. Correct.
And what form of communication will the panels use to send information back to the remote management?
So there's a system called SCADA. It's the system that controls the whole power plant. All of the links, the communication links between the plant itself and where the control is either over fiber optic links or wire cable.
Okay, so fiber optic does not exist in this, correct? In this project?
No, there usually is fiber optic, especially around where the substation is. A lot of, when you tie into the grid, there's a lot of communication that goes on at that point, and pretty much all the grid suppliers and the people that, the companies like PJM that you tie into usually have requirements for some of that communication to be over fiber.
Okay, so you will have to still run fiber lines from the either inverters to the substation?
No, right now the technology has gotten away from that. It's usually Wi-Fi from the inverters. Control of the inverters and control of the trackers is by Wi-Fi from the control system.
So the control system and inverters will require internet?
Yes.
Is there infrastructure there that there's currently internet access on these parcels?
I don't know that there is, but it would have to be put in. And that's usually just a typical part of the project, is installing the network requirements.
And that all of that will fully tie into the substation and the grid that PJM manages?
For the power output, yeah. I mean, the plant itself has its local control, and PJM, whoever's dispatching that plant, also has control. So PJM would also have some tie into the control center. Okay.
You mentioned during strong winds or potentially hazardous weather, what would or wouldn't happen to solar panels. What is the protocol for the construction workers during winds or potentially hazardous weather?
Yeah, that's again decided by the EPC contractor, but I can tell you every EPC contractor, and it would be a requirement pretty much on this project as well, have a health and safety plan put together and approved before construction starts. So in that health and safety plan, it will define what happens if there's bad thunderstorms, that everybody either musters at certain places to get information and then is either directed off-site or to some other place. So there'll be muster points around the site that'll be determined. And so any adverse weather, bad wind, thunderstorms, lightning, hail, any of that, tornadoes, that won't be handled that way.
Okay. In the event of strong winds, with the material drop sites during construction, are there risks of loose fragments or debris?
No, since none of the material is very high off the ground. So the piles, which would be staged, as I said, they're very heavy, so the wind would blow them. The panels, the solar panels, they come in crates, and they're not taking out the crates until they're actually going to be installed. So there wouldn't be like solar panels laying around that the wind could catch. The trackers and the framing are the same way. The trackers are very heavy, so they wouldn't get blown around. The framing is in pieces, but again, it's in boxes or in pallets, and they're only taken out when at the point that they actually need it. So again, there wouldn't be small pieces to be caught and blown around by the wind.
Okay, and then last one or two. So are you going to be working directly with Solar Creek to prepare documents necessary for the building permitting process?
That hasn't been decided. Right now, my scope of work is to support the development of the construction management plan.
Will that construction management plan need to be provided for the, do you know if that will need to be provided for the building permit?
No, typically the building permits only require drawings of the site.
Okay. All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm going to stay on the top tier here. Giles Cavalage.
Greetings. Hello, Mr. Laird. I'm with Willow Creek Township Planning Group. And some of the questions that I had have already been asked. So I'll ask a couple smaller questions and maybe a follow-up or two on some of the others. Do you know approximately how many solar panels would be expected in a 5,000 acre farm?
Yeah, for a project this size, being 600 megawatts, it's going to be around 2.1 million solar panels.
Okay. All right, and how many, we talked yesterday about pile machines probably making the most noise. With that many panels, how many pile machines would you expect to be working at any given time?
So the actual number, again, will be dictated by the construction contractor based on his schedule and resource allocations. But a project of this size, you would probably see maybe 3 to 4 pile machines.
Okay, thank you. Couple of follow-up questions that I've got with communication. So the Wi-Fi would be garnished locally, would it not be?
Well, yeah, the way these projects work with the Wi-Fi is they would go out to somebody that provides Wi-Fi. Let's say, just for talking purposes, somebody like AT&T or somebody like that, and they would have special Wi-Fi brought into the project site for the control of all of the a dedicated Wi-Fi network for the control of all the systems on site.
Would that be using any of our contractors that we would have locally here around our area?
I can't speak for the internet provider, but they typically go to local internet providers for that. So I would assume there would be local contractors who would provide that, correct?
Okay. With approximately 2 million panels, would local residents and local businesses expect to see any noticeable bandwidth restrictions for our normal everyday operations?
I can't speak for the Wi-Fi company, but like I say, it would be a dedicated Wi-Fi system for the plant, so I wouldn't think it would affect, and I've never heard of, on the other solar projects, of people complaining that the plant has affected their Wi-Fi. So I would tend to believe that, no, it wouldn't affect the local communities.
Okay, thank you for that answer. One last follow-up question that I've got on the decommissioning. You mentioned that you know of no solar plants that have been decommissioned.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just kind of wondering, why is it because solar panels are too new and they've not outlived their lifespan yet, or is it because at the end of the project they're just left?
No, so the reason I haven't seen any, not aware of it, is first of all, the large solar projects, basically utility grid type projects like this, they've only started within the last 10 years. And these project design lives and operating lives are usually 30 to 40 years. So these large plants are just starting into maybe their second decade of, on the early ones. So none of them have reached the end of their life to actually do the decommissioning of them. And it's not that there would be any plants just abandoned in place. I've never seen any county or community that would allow that, and I know Lee County and the local townships wouldn't allow that here either. So no, there are decommissioning plants for every one of those plants. They just haven't reached their life, end of their life to implement those plans.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much. That's all the questions that I have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry Boydick?
Terry, can you hear me? Terry Boydick?
Am I unmuted?
You are. You are unmuted. We can hear you.
First of all, my name is Terry Boydick, and of course, Lee, Illinois. I want to thank whoever worked so hard on the audio today. It was almost impossible to hear yesterday, so it's much better today.
Good to hear.
My first question is about the topography of the area. This is a pretty special area as far as farmland with rolling. It's not your normal flat, boring farmland like central Illinois. And my question for Mr. Lear is, how much are you going to change the topography as you progress through this project?
To fully answer that question, that hasn't been decided yet. The way that process works is a hydrology study is done to verify or get where all the stormwater flows are. So that factors into the topography of what the plant's going to end up with, as well as when they lay out in the initial design for the solar plant itself, and they run the solar models to verify that the plant can meet the output requirements, the 600 megawatts. So those things all interact to determine what that final topography is going to look like. So those points haven't been hit yet. I will say, most solar plants try to maintain the topography as much as possible. I mean, I've seen large solar plants built on the side of mountains. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the area that you put the plant in has to be flat. Rolling hills, I've seen plants put in on sites that have rolling hills. So, like I say, the goal, it's a target, is to try to maintain the topography as close to what it currently would be.
Okay, and so should you change the topography significantly, which I think all of us would hope that it would not be done. When you decommission, would you replace it and restore it to the way that it was left from the glacial days?
Yeah, that's kind of a good question. Like I said, typically, and I would make the assumption here that the topography here would stay pretty much the way it is. There may be a few areas for drainage, or if there's some shading, it may get filled in or cut out to either affect the drainage better or to provide, the sunlight the panels need. But those are usually local areas in this whole project. Now, I wouldn't guess that the project would get flattened and then at the end, the project would come back, put the rolling hills back in. So I believe that's part of the reason they try to maintain the topography as opposed to what it is right now.
Thank you. I don't know if this question or this issue was addressed yesterday because I couldn't hear when we had the environmental person who was Scott Billings. But regarding an ESI, are you going to have one done, or has one been done, and who is going to do it?
An ESI, I'm not the environmental guy, so I don't know that I can answer that question.
Okay. Does anyone know, was it answered yesterday?
We got a witness on the stand and he's under oath.
Okay.
Just for questions of him.
Last question is, okay, when we're ready to decommission in today's dollars, have you guys adjusted it for inflation for 35 years from today so that you aren't out of money when you're ready to decommission?
Yeah, the decommissioning cost estimate hasn't been done yet. It gets done prior to the issuance of the building permit. But the way those cost estimates go are, they're figured in today's dollars, and you can escalate them out to what you're going to need at the end of the life of the project. But then the frequency varies from county to county, but every so often that estimate gets revisited over the life of the project to make sure that it gets updated and compared to what's being set aside to make sure there is enough money at the end.
So that should be factored in when the agreement is done.
I'm not sure which agreement you're talking about.
Well, if you get final approval, will that be part of the agreement?
The cost estimate will be in the decommissioning plan, correct? And I don't know that, I'm not sure what agreement you're talking about. The cost estimate has to be in the decommissioning plan prior to the building permit.
Okay. And my last question, the pylon machines or pile machines, how much vibration, if any, in the ground?
Yeah, they're hammering the piles in basically, so there is local vibration around the machine, but you get 10 feet away, you can't really feel it. You'll hear it a little bit, but and the noise goes down substantially as you get away from that unit as well. So you don't feel the vibration because I've stood within 30, 50 yards of them, and you don't feel it. If you're right next to it, you would, but that's about it.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you. Ms. Wojtek, to answer your questions, there are a couple ways you can find out what questions were asked and answered yesterday. One is the kind of probably laborious method of going to YouTube and pulling up yesterday to the October 19th session and maybe fast forwarding through it or till you get to whatever you're looking for, or either presently or not too far in the future, the court reporter's transcript will be available on the website and you can page it. It's probably easier paging your way through the transcript. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Lear. And you're excused and it's time for a break. We'll resume at 5 after 8.
You make sure we give Zach the accolades.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
About 2:30. He met with us, take the weather out. Oil was down. Yes. That line. Then we got the 24. Somebody got an extra. I've had that over 1,000. Of course, it's dry and it's heavy. And I'll be all 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Let's go. You don't have to drive.
Gene, what do you do with your corn? Do you store it inside or you get?
All those are the elevator anymore. They store it. Or I sell it.
Right.
If I could get yourself out at $4 a day, but you wouldn't go.
Right.
Tell you what. He said, I can give you $3.89. I said, no, I want $4. Started to take off that commission and all that stuff.
So our next night is gonna be this Thursday then?
Yes.
If-
He said, what?
I just wanna know procedure wise, if we have one witness left and we don't call any rebuttal witnesses, will that conclude Thursday nights or will we just go into interested parties?
The way I look at it, not just we're gonna go into interest.
Okay.
I may be being unreasonable,
He said,
and you can tell me in about 3 weeks, tell me I'm unreasonable, but I just.
I think we have to. I'm comfortable with that. I was just curious.
The reason we're doing them tomorrow is he posted available days.
so he put it in, so I'll put it in 450.
I'm just worried somebody's not.
No, I'm with you. That's fine by me. I'm just curious.
All 6 cents. I don't know what.
Yeah, that's what happened. I mean, I think that. We tried it. I was like, oh gosh, where are we going? Yeah.
So some are 950. While we're harvesting. Picked up, nothing but 950.
I didn't expect it to get this high.
Oh, I need it. I did point of back a few years ago, it said $7. Right time you want it. Yeah.
$4 bargain looks.
But there wasn't too many that got up and down. Yeah. Last year, everybody changed equipment. Got new.
Gotta remember that.
That's a lot.
Equipment dealers couldn't keep any in stock. Everybody looking to depreciate stuff quick.
We need that again.
Yeah, I agree.
How many tractors, you got any tractors you gonna trade off?
Yeah,
So I thought it was skirmish.
What I got?
Yeah.
Sounds like him. Actually, I think it was Mike Bragg's idea.
Hopefully gives him the credit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes. I don't think they ever get the other one. We had two that went in that time. He was there for a while, I know, so rented it out. Now, we've had the one, we're getting anything out, so that's the one that. Wait, I don't really. We had it. You got to hurt. You know. Yeah, that's too far.
Sorry. Did we get right in your face?
What's that, 2011? Come on. I don't know, the young kid.
Thank you.
Are you sure we don't?
I'm sure you don't.
They're always doing that.
I think I Andy Ryerson, but I noticed last night, one of my parents tuned in, so I was surprised by that.
A lot of little sites there.
We got a couple weeks yet.
Well, probably, like I say, tomorrow we can.
Three, you guys go.
So,
Yeah. Who knew?
yeah. Yeah, we knew we were gonna. Should've just done.
We got two people. Me, send out. I got that's not too bad. He had my meeting.
You were worried when they come up.
Yeah.
Right up to county boards. Yeehaw. So
Yeah, we almost had it.
I'll have the transcripts. So they'll be on my. I'm not worried
Well.
Charlie's looking at his watch.
I was looking to see how much time I had before the start.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Resume your positions, please. All right. Ms. Kennedy, you may continue to produce dividends.
Thank you. I'd like to call Andrew Lyons.
And by Zoom, is that right? I think I saw his name up there.
That is correct.
Mr. Lyons, a couple technical questions first. Can you hear me right at the moment?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Great.
All right, you want to raise your right hand, please, for me? You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. You may inquire.
Thank you. Could you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Sure. Andrew Lines, Lines.
And could you briefly describe your educational background for us?
I have a bachelor's degree from Syracuse University, and I have a certified general commercial real estate appraiser license in the state of Illinois, and I hold the MAI designation, which means I'm a full member of the Appraisal Institute.
And what did you have to do to get that MAI designation?
About 10 years of post-secondary study at classes in the Appraisal Institute, including over 3,500 hours of commercial appraisal experience, as well as a demonstration report and a 4-part 2-day comprehensive examination.
And how are you presently employed?
I'm a principal at Cone Resnick.
And what does Cone Resnick do?
Cone Resnick is a national advisory, insurance, and tax firm, and there's a specialty in real estate. I serve as a partner and help oversee our valuation division.
And what are your job duties as a principal?
I help manage our appraisal staff. I help manage a workflow that goes in and out the door. I try to get new work and provide world-class service to our clients.
And how long have you been in that position?
I have been a principal for 4 years, and I've been with the firm for 9.
Do you have any other relevant work experience?
I worked for a year with Equity Residential Properties starting in the year 2000, but I've generally been a real estate appraiser for the last 18 years.
And have you performed any research related to solar energy systems?
I have.
And could you tell us a little about that?
Sure. For the last 3.5 years or so, my team and I and one of the partners I work with have been investigating existing solar arrays around the country, including Hawaii, to see whether or not there's any negative impact to adjacent property values as caused by proximity to the solar farm itself.
And are you familiar with Stewart Creek Solar?
And
And are you aware that it's a proposed 600 megawatt solar farm on about 5,000 acres?
I am.
And what materials, if any, did you review in conducting your analysis for Stewart Creek Solar?
I examined the application packet that I believe was submitted to the county with regards to the solar project itself. In addition, I've reviewed studies, other impact studies on solar, as well as various pieces of literature that discuss methodology for preparing impact studies.
And could you tell us in layman's terms what a paired sales analysis is?
Sure. This is one of the approaches that's noted in an Appraisal Institute textbook called Real Estate Damages. This is written by Dr. Randy Bell, who's also an MAI like myself. Dr. Bell discusses a number of approaches. One of them is paired sales analysis. And at the most basic level, it's when you compare one property with one other property, with the only difference being one variable. And so by looking at a price differential or what have you between those two transactions, you can identify whether or not one of them may have been impacted by what some people would call a presupposed deleterious use.
And so you mentioned other approaches to develop or to assess impacts to real estate. What are those other approaches?
You can do what's called a regression analysis or hedonic regression analysis, which just means that you're using multiple variables. That type of analysis requires a lot of data and a good computer. And that reporting is a different way of using logs and other mathematical applied sciences to determine and to help quantify whether or not there might be an impact. It's also group pairs, which is another tactic that appraisers can use in measuring impact. What we prefer to do is to do a slight variation on a single paired sales. So what we do is we look at one test sales or a group of test sales and compare them to a group of control sales. We eliminate all subjectivity. There aren't any adjustments made for physical characteristics. We feel that this is really the best way to help isolate that particular variable that we're looking for, which in this case is proximity.
And then that would be proximity to the solar farm, correct?
For our impact study, it is yes.
Is the paired sales analysis an industry standard approach for analyzing the impact of solar farm development?
It's certainly an approach for impact studies as an appraiser would use. Again, regression is another tactic. There's been a lot of studies that were performed on wind. Solar, although it's been around for a long time, there are very few studies that have been produced on a national or global basis. I like to think that we're one of the leaders in the field.
Are there any factors that affect the price paid for a piece of property?
There are a number of different variables and factors. They can be physical. Obviously, people know of location, and that certainly is an overwhelming reason why someone pays the amount that they do. Certainly for residential property, being in a highly rated school district is one of the most important. But there are a number of factors as to why someone might pay a little bit more for this house and a little bit less for another.
So how do you account for these factors so that it doesn't skew the results of your analysis?
Our analysis starts with just identifying all the properties that are around an existing solar array. We'll use public records for identifying whether or not any of those properties, whatever kind of residential properties or agricultural, commercial may have sold. Once we've identified those sales and can prove that those transactions are market transactions, so they're not bankruptcy sales or trustee sales or the result of the divorce, and they were arm's length between a willing buyer and a willing seller, we clarify those and call them test subjects or test sales. Once we've identified those test sales, we then canvass the marketplace in a larger area, but making sure that none of those sales are in any close range to the solar farm itself. So far enough away that no one can say, well, the solar farm is still influencing that particular property. We make sure that our group selection of controlled sales bracket the subject test sales with regards to house size, acreage, and year built, just to make sure that we're still comparing apples to apples. It's not unlike what you might see a single appraiser do when they come to appraise your home, right? They look at your home and they grab a group of sales in your area to measure that against. What we don't do is do any adjustments for the physical characteristics. We make sure that there is a small adjustment made for market conditions as relates to the date of sale. So we're trying to get our sales to be consistent as to when that specific test subject sold. And then we will compare the median prices per square foot of the test sales and the control sales and measure whether or not there's any difference. If there is an overwhelmingly negative difference, and that is repeatable in multiple solar, then we might be able to conclude that there's some influence derived from the solar arrays themselves. But what we found in over 24 solar farms that we've studied nationwide is there is no measurable and repeatable indication of any negative loss in value.
Sure. So if I understand correctly, a paired sales analysis is where you compare the sale price of a property with a feature of interest, or in this case, the proximity to a solar farm development. and you compare that to the price of a similar property sold recently without that feature?
Not just one house, but a group of homes.
Do you consult anyone in conducting your analysis?
So my partner, Patricia McGar, has been a real estate appraiser here in the state of Illinois for over 25 years. She also serves as the vice chairman of the Illinois Board of Appraisers, where she helps set the rules that govern appraisers like myself. We've also discussed our methodology with other appraisers in the field, including Kirkland Appraisals, which is in North Carolina, and it's been producing their own studies on solar farms and their impact to reducing real estate. We've also discussed our methodology with SEIA, which is the Solar Energy Association. It's an industry energy association national.
Have you ever contacted an assessment officer?
Absolutely. I would say that we conducted interviews with close to 60 or 70 different county tax assessors and municipal assessors across the country. We specifically asked assessors who have solar arrays within their taxing districts because they have the transactional data around them to quantify whether or not there might be an impact from an existing solar farm. And in all the interviews that we've conducted, we haven't identified a single assessor who states that they believe that there's an impact, nor have we heard any assessor claim that anyone has protested their tax assessment strictly due to the presence of the solar farm in their area.
Does the same ring true for real estate agents?
We have interviewed real estate brokers who have been party to transactions near solar arrays, and the interviews that we've conducted are consistent. Almost all brokers that we've spoken to don't believe that solar farms impact the property that they've helped sell in any way, and that the marketing times and the sale prices they believe are inconsistent with the market. And that includes brokers that we've spoken with here in Illinois.
And so is it a fair statement that when you conduct your analysis, you don't just hop on the internet, go on Zillow and look at the list price of a property? Is that fair?
No, one of the first things they teach you in Appraisal Institute classes is that list price is really nice, but it isn't fact. Fact is when a sale and a transaction happens, and that's why we measure sale prices and not just list prices. That's a very important part of being a real estate appraiser.
Are there factors of a sale that could perhaps make that sale an outlier in your analysis?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, it's really critical when we're looking for test and control data that we remove any outliers that may have been caused by an atypical sales transaction. So if it's a bankruptcy or a short sale or it was related parties, those situations may require some kind of adjustment. So instead of doing an adjustment, we just remove it from any consideration because they don't uphold to the definition of market value.
Jumping to this project at hand, did you prepare a report for Stewart Creek Solar?
We did.
And when I thumbed through the report, it looks like your study includes research and analyses of existing solar farms in Illinois, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan, New York, North Carolina, and Virginia. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And why did you select those areas specifically?
So again, while solar has been around for a while, large-scale utility-scale solar projects are not as ubiquitous, especially not in the Midwest. I have a couple of exhibits within the report which show the number or placement of existing solar farms that are in excess of 100 megawatts, and then also existing farms that are in excess of 200 megawatts, and they're very sparse. The only one really in the Midwest that's 100 megawatts is in Minnesota, Otherwise, you have to go to the southeast or the far southwest. We try to identify as large a solar array that we could find that had residential property immediately adjacent to offer test subjects for us to measure. We can't just create data. And so there were some solar farms that may have been large enough for us to study, but didn't have any data around them. And so we couldn't study them. These we felt were the best fit and had the largest amount of data for us to try to measure whether or not there was an impact. In most cases, these were similar ex-urban agricultural communities that had, small 4-bedroom, 2-bath homes on, 2 to 5 acres. And in some circumstances, they are in areas where the property values are very high. And in some, there are a couple areas where the property values are very low. We made sure that we understood what property values were in Lee County, and we did our best to make sure that we had a study that had consistent prices with fairly consistent looking homes. And I do feel that the study in Minnesota is probably the best. It's also the largest one that we identified. But overall, I think we did the best that we possibly could.
And that leads me to my next question then. So the largest solar farm that you've included in your report for this project is the North Star Solar Farm in Chisago County, Minnesota?
That's correct.
And that's a 100 megawatt solar farm on about 1,000 acres, is that correct?
That's correct.
So obviously that's significantly smaller than the proposed size of Stewart Creek Solar.
It is, but again, these solar arrays in almost most of their fashions, they're not created as a 100 in a perfect rectangle. It's only in the smaller senses, 10 to 25 or 30 megawatts where you might see it in one solid rectangle. So there's no case where you're going to have a single adjacent property that's going to give you a view of the entire 600 megawatts at once. It's spread out. It has to be. It needs a lot of land. And so I don't feel that the studies that we performed and the site selection that we did in identifying these sites for study are inconsistent with what I would call scattered sites. You basically have a number of parcels that are fairly contiguous, where the number of megawatts for that particular acreage might be, in the 2 to 10 category. And so it's just an assemblage of those over, a land swath. In this case, and I'm sure I've heard solar developers say this, they're really bound by, landowners who want to cooperate and be part of that development.
And so if I understand this correctly, you've included the North Star Solar Farm in your report because the surrounding area is similar to the surrounding area in Stewart Creek Solar, is that right?
That's correct.
What about the topography of the North Star Solar Farm? Is that similar to this area?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it extremely flat. It may not have, quite the contours that this area, just east of I-39 has, which is really wonderful. But certainly there's a little bit of topography there. And then we have other sites that we've included in the report, ones in North Carolina and Virginia, which do have even larger contours and steeper topography.
Have you ever investigated a solar farm in excess of 100 megawatts?
We did look at some very large established solar arrays. This includes the Topaz Solar Farm, which is in San Luis Obispo County in California. That one is 585 megawatts. It generally was developed in an environmentally sensitive area of the desert and pretty far away. It's over an hour drive from any town or city. There is very limited residential development nearby. It is not really as consistent with regards to climate the way that it is in the Midwest. Ultimately, because of the data and because of some of the physical characteristics, it wasn't a solar farm that we opted to study.
So is it fair to say that it's not that there aren't any large solar farms, it's just they're not in an area comparable to this area here and proposed in the Stewart Creek Solar Project?
There are large solar farms, as shown in my exhibit in my report. They're fundamentally all in the southwest, but ultimately I'm bound and can only study solar farms that have existing sales data immediately around them.
With the properties that you've analyzed in your report and with your experience in this field specifically, do you believe that a project of this magnitude will negatively impact surrounding land values?
I do not believe it will negatively impact surrounding land values.
And why?
Sorry, please repeat.
Why is that?
Based on our study, the 10 studies that were included in the report, an additional 15 to 20 solar farms and smaller studies that we've conducted nationwide and in Hawaii, we have not seen any consistent and measurable negative impact that is caused by being next to a solar farm. And again, this is substantiated with our own data, our own measurements, studies conducted by other appraisers, studies conducted by county assessors and their own information in-house, as well as interviews that we've had with local real estate brokers and residents. I mean, we've gone door to door and interviewed residents that live within the adjacent solar farms. And in all of those cases, none of them seem to indicate that there should be a concern.
Have you ever seen a solar farm system where it surrounds an adjacent property on all four sides?
In Minnesota, there are 4 homes that are right next to each other. They're 3, 4, 5 acre sites, long and narrow. And so there's a group of them that have solar on all 4 sides. There's also a residence across the street, which has it on 3 sides. Those setbacks, I want to say, are about 100 feet from the property line, so fairly close. There aren't a lot of examples of a single residence having 4 solar arrays right around it and within 100 feet. But I don't think, based on the data that we've seen and the interviews that we've conducted, that there's a cause for concern. Especially not when we're talking about the proposed and with the really large setbacks that Hexagon is planning for this particular development.
So would you agree that the farther the setback from the residence, the less likely it will negatively impact that adjacent residence?
Again, I don't believe that there would be an impact, but certainly I think that's going to put the existing property owner more at ease. Whether or not a buyer would consider that in their pricing, again, I don't believe that there's an impact, but certainly for existing residents, I think that's a real nicety and probably a benefit.
So in your experience, Mr. Lyons, when do you tend to see a negative impact to property values?
We've done impact studies on a number of different kinds of uses that people are concerned about. That includes big box retail, landfills, waste transfer stations, transmission lines, and zoning districts, truck terminals. We've looked at a lot of different kinds of real estate. What we normally see are when there is a physical impact to an adjacent residence or an adjacent property, that's typically where you're going to see the most impact. If you're living next to a quarry and that quarry is doing blasting and the ground shakes and dirt is thrown into your yard, that is certainly a situation that most people are not going to be able to tolerate. And so they'll tend to leave their homes as soon as they can, and they end up selling at a pretty low value or a pretty low price. We see it again if your home is located 10 feet from a roadway, and now you have a lot of heavy trucks that are moving by, shake the ground, rattle your house. That's another example, if it's continued and ongoing, where you might see some real impact. Where something crosses onto your property, and this becomes an encroachment, that certainly can be destructive to value. That's usually where we see the most impact. We don't see impact for passive uses, especially not ones like this, which are really quiet, where you don't have anybody really coming to the property, which you can't see in the evenings at all, or probably not even midday if you've got good and effective screening around you. I can't see that this is a particular use that's going to have a real negative impact.
So that's leading me to my next questions. Can you smell a solar energy farm?
I mean, there's some people out there who smell metal really well, but I don't think that I've been to them and I haven't smelled anything unusual other than the agrarian community that's around it.
And so to the best of your knowledge, does a solar farm cause any objects to be ejected onto an adjacent property owner's land?
Not that I've seen.
Is there any shadow flicker associated with a solar energy farm?
No, my understanding is that the single axis tractors move really, really slowly.
What about any vibration?
Not that I'm aware of.
And what about the noise level of a solar energy farm?
Some of the inverters and the transformers that they put on site, I think they can have some kind of sound like an air conditioner within 150 feet. But outside of 150 feet, in the studies that I've seen, and I'm not a sound expert, but my understanding is that there's no noise that can be heard outside of that distance.
And so, through your research, do you believe that this proposed solar farm, do you believe that it will have any negative impact on adjacent property?
I do not.
And it's my understanding that you've prepared a PowerPoint presentation for tonight?
I have, if it's of interest to the board and individuals present.
And you've also prepared an actual report for the ZBA, is that correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to mark the impact study as an exhibit. I forget what number
That's
we're
the
on.
one, the shorter one.
This one would be the longer one, I believe.
Well, I'm not trying to be difficult. There's one with his picture on the front,
Sure,
and there's one without his picture on the front. So which one do you want to mark first?
it doesn't matter. We can mark the one with this picture on it first.
Okay, that would be, I think, 8. Let me check. Yes, I think petitioner's 8.
And then the next one would be petitioner's exhibit 9.
That's correct.
Mr. Lyons, did you personally prepare both the report and the PowerPoint presentation?
I am a signature of the report. I prepared it. We do have some additional staff that helps with some of the research and putting things together. My partner and I, Pat McGar, oversee the production, all of the data, review all the data, and put it all together. So yes.
Which at this time I'd like to admit them into evidence.
Not till he testifies about it, but I'll reserve that.
What's that I missed that? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I said I'll reserve that because there's no foundation laid for them yet.
Mr. Lyons, I'm going to have you go through your PowerPoint presentation now, if you will.
Okay. Is this something you want me to do using the Zoom?
Yes, if you could share your screen, that would be appreciated.
Okay, hold on 1 second here. Okay. Let me know when you can see it.
Yep, we can see it.
Great. Again, here's my background. We've kind of gone over that. And this is Pat McGar, who is my partner and who also signed the report. It's always helpful to understand the market for solar. And so the state of Illinois has a national ranking based on existing capacity of 30th. And so obviously the former government instituted some policies to help encourage some of that development, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of applications and a lot of solar development happening in our state. And I think that's always good to understand kind of the baseline of that. Existing developments that we would have been able to study. Well, we studied the largest one that's here and erected, and that's the Grand Ridge Solar Farm. There's a couple other ones. There's one in Chicago in the city that was developed by Exelon. There's a smaller one by UI. And Rockford has one that's immediately adjacent to the airport. We studied it. It's not large enough, and there really isn't a good quality of data right there. But it's a good indication of kind of the amount of solar and renewable energy that's scheduled to be in the state. So does proximity next to solar farm impact values? Again, our methodology comes from a textbook, Real Estate Damages by Dr. Randy Bell. We've reviewed studies that have been published. We've interviewed market participants, and we've prepared paired sales analysis to compare these potentially impacted properties. Again, we're looking at test areas, which are homes and land that's located immediately adjacent to a solar array, and then comparing them with control areas or control subjects, which are removed from any influence of the solar farm, but are consistent in terms of physical characteristics. We've also conducted a before and after analysis to track differences in unit sale prices. We've done this for a couple of the solar farms, not every one, but enough that we can safely say that there isn't any difference between sales that were occurring before the solar development was announced or after it was erected. And again, what Dr. Bell says is that if there's a legitimate detrimental condition, there will likely be a measurable and consistent difference between two sets of market data. So we need to see it multiple times in order to really declare that there is an influence. We've done this research on what I'm about to show you, and we've looked at range of sale prices, differences in unit sale prices, time on the market, overall marketability. We studied rates of appreciation, and we've looked to see whether or not solar impacts new development on existing pieces of land that are next to it. And in all the research that we've conducted, we haven't been able to find that quantifiable and consistent detrimental impact. As I mentioned before, with large-scale solar, we understand that this is a really large development, a really large proposed development, and we wanted to make sure that we were attending to that for the county board and for the residents. You see two maps here that are courtesy of SEIA.org. SEIA, you're welcome to go on there, and you can take a look at where all the solar farms are across the country. So there's two maps here, one of 100 megawatts and over, and one of 200 megawatts and over. And as you can see, there's only one here in the Midwest. They're all, most of them are in pretty desert and super remote areas. And for 200 megawatts, it's even fewer. So again, we tried to identify solar arrays that we thought would provide some meaningful data. And I'm going to take you through a few of them, not all of them, just for brevity purposes. So the first one here in Illinois, this is in LaSalle County. This is the Grand Ridge Solar Farm. This is a 20 megawatt solar facility that opened in 2013, some time ago. There is a home in the corner. You see it's labeled number 12. What we do, if you're curious, is we'll go on the GIS and we'll identify using the tax maps each property that's immediately adjacent. So you see these numbered from 1 to 14. We don't look at the ones that are removed. It's got to be touching to some degree. It might be right across the street, but it's effectively touching on the tax maps. And then we'll go and we'll look through public records to identify whether or not any of those have sold, if they've sold multiple times, and see if any of the transactions have been during the existence of the solar farm itself. So in this one, at 12, it was a small house on a pretty small lot. And so we compared this home with 5 other homes in the general community within the township, but outside of any possible seeing the solar array so well over, I believe, a quarter mile away from this existing solar farm. In this particular instance, it's about 479 feet. We found that the control sales had a median sale price that was actually a little bit less than the sale price of the test subject itself, meaning that there was no negative impact for being located immediately next to the Grand Ridge Solar Farm. The next one I'll talk about is the one in Minnesota, which I think is very applicable. Here you can see the homes that I mentioned that are flanked by solar on all 4 sides, including one here that's flanked on 3 sides. This is an interesting story. The developer believed that he was going to use these homes that were within the project. He was going to use them for temporary employment housing, and possibly he might tear them down and erect solar in their stead. What he did is he had them all appraised, and then he individually negotiated sale prices with each one of the owners to force them out of their homes. He overpaid for the homes to get them out. What he realized after building the project was that he didn't need them anymore. And so he put them all back on the market with one broker, and the broker noted that all of them sold within 60 days, and all at market prices that were above the original appraisals. This is a really good indication that this doesn't deter people from living near these. In fact, one of the homes was reoccupied and bought back by one of the original owners who ended up being able to pocket some cash on that one. So again, somebody who was living there, left, came back. This is a greater map of the entire 1,000 acres with all the development. You can see how it's a little bit scattered. So you have homes that are nearby and immediately adjacent. We found some homes, again, that were market prices. We're able to compare them to controls that were outside of being right near them. And we found that there was very little difference here, 0.43%. This particular solar farm had the local county assessor do his own before and after analysis. This was released to the public. You can find it on the internet. We repeated the study just to make sure it was accurate, and it is. And so we feel that we've got multiple studies here that show that there wasn't any impact on any of the residences. And again, this is the largest one that we were able to study, and it's here in the Midwest. The third, which had a lot of data for us to look at, was just south of Indianapolis, the Dominion Indy Solar. We looked at agricultural land, so we looked at, you see number 2 here on the side of the screen, which was, it was about an 80-acre parcel. We looked at farmland values just to make sure. This is a little bit near the trend of development, and so you might be concerned that if you had some farmland and you weren't going to be able to sell it for redevelopment because now you're next to a solar farm. Well, that's not the case. But it also was immediately adjacent to a production home subdivision where a lot of the homes were the same. And for a real estate analyst like myself, that's great. Because now I have a lot of data that backs up to the solar farm, and I can compare that to a very similar production homes that are in the same community but are located much farther away and see if there's any difference. We grouped these into time periods because there was a bit of a spike. And what we found was that the homes that back up here across the street, where you can see the solar from the backyards, that there wasn't any difference in price. We also did that before and after analysis that I mentioned. So we looked at these target homes before and after the solar farm was announced and constructed. We found that the trend lines were similar with the controlled areas. We also mapped it against the FHFA house price index for East North Central, which includes this area of Indiana. And as you can see, both the parabolas here follow the trend line that was happening, on a larger basis and nationally, as many of us probably remember, it going down and then things coming back up again, which is nice. One interesting tidbit to note is that there is a 10-acre, very long parcel. You can see here in the middle picture, it was obviously used for row crops. And somebody built a pretty magnificent home with a huge in-ground pool. And that home is literally 150 feet away from the solar farm. this to us is a really important piece of data because it shows that someone's willing to develop and invest a lot of money into a really nice home that's immediately adjacent to solar panels. In this case, it was about 150 feet. Now, there was some natural screening there, mostly deciduous trees, but it's still 150 feet away. This is probably the last one I'll show you. I don't need to probably go through all 10, but this one is in Lapeer, Michigan, again, Midwest. These are two kind of side-by-side solar farms, and we found a test sale, one on Turrill on the right, and then 3 on DeMille, which is on the left. And when we looked at those home prices compared with control sales located in Lapeer, but away from these two solar farms, we didn't find a large difference. And in fact, both of those cases, it favored the homes that were closer to the solar farm itself. Here's a conclusion of all of the studies that we did, all 10. This includes a couple of the land prices as well as home prices. The range was as low as negative 3.5% to a high of 13.4%. While there was one negative, that's probably a pretty good indication that we're doing our job correctly, and it's not amazingly large. At the end of the day, when you look at the average variance in sale prices between the test and control sales, we came up about 3.5% that favored the homes next to the solar arrays. And a lot of county boards have asked as well, are you saying that by putting a home next to solar, that it's going to do better? And we don't necessarily think that the solar farm panels are having a specific influence, but what we do know about residential home prices is that people will pay more to be in well-funded and highly ranked school districts. And certainly a lot of these solar arrays will contribute to the economic consideration of an entire community, and that can be really, really helpful for everybody's home value. But ultimately, based on our research and analysis, we've concluded that there is no consistent negative impact that has occurred to the adjacent property. It can be attributed to proximity to the adjacent solar farm. Again, this conclusion is being confirmed by interviews with numerous county assessors who also investigated this use's potential impact, found none, as well as interviews that we've had with numerous market participants, brokers, and buyers and sellers of these homes. I think I'll end there and turn it back over to you, Courtney.
Thank you. Mr. Lyons, could you pull up the actual report you performed for Stewart Creek Solar?
Okay.
Could you share your screen with us?
Okay.
And is this, in fact, the report you prepared for the Stewart Creek Solar Farm here in Lee County?
I believe it is.
And did you summarize the contents of this report in your PowerPoint presentation?
I did.
Judge, I'd like to admit this into evidence as well.
All right, done, both.
I have no further questions.
All right. Questions of this witness, Mr. Bloomsdale. Ms. Duffy?
Thank you.
Okay. How about ZBA? You're first, Mr. Hughes.
No questions.
Mr. Forster? Yes.
No questions.
Mr. Burrow?
Yes, sir.
Microphone.
In looking at the various properties that you've looked at, did you notice very many of the residences had barriers or landscaping next to them dealing with the solar farms or not?
It's a great question, and it really varied. There are some solar farms that we studied that all they had was a simple fence and there wasn't much of a barrier, and you could peer right in to see the arrays and some of the grasslands that were there. There were others that had fairly large arborvitaes and other trees and it was a mix of solar developers planting them and then property owners planting and screening it for themselves. So it was a mix.
So did you notice any difference in the values that you could tell then?
No, for the most part, the studies all had fairly similar results. So we didn't see a spike for one that had a bunch of arborvitaes versus ones where you could peer right in without any screening at all.
Okay, thank you.
Is it Mr. Booking? Mr. Pratt? All right, interested parties in the room first by show of hands. Questions of Mr. Lyons? Pick one of the mics in the middle and have a seat.
Adam was from Elvina.
Thank you.
I just got a question. Why wouldn't you consider an alteration of view shed as part of your study?
I just want to make sure I heard you. You're wondering why I did not look at the degradation of view shed as part of my study?
Correct, as it pertains to solar, yes.
Our study incorporates all of the factors that individual buyers recognize when they're acquiring a particular home. And frankly, when you're looking at buying a home for yourself, there are, as I discussed earlier, many variables. View shed is certainly one of them, but it may not be as high on the priority list as one might think. And depending on market to market, it may be a lot lower. So certainly when you have a home that's on a lake and you've got some of that lakefront, or maybe you just set back from the lake and you get to look out on it, we've seen markets where you can command a premium for that. But what we're not seeing in some of the agricultural communities is the necessity that view shed is automatically providing that value. If it were, then we would see markedly negative results from our studies.
You don't. Very good. That's all.
Okay. Anybody else? Question of everything? Yes, sir.
Lauren Guasto Stewart. How much do residential development have you seen next to a solar industrial plant of this magnitude?
Could somebody help me repeat that question? I'm so sorry, I was having trouble.
Okay, I'm sorry. How much new residential development have you seen next to a solar industrial plant of this magnitude?
I provided an example of a $450,000 home with the big in-ground pool that was developed immediately next to a solar array. And depending on where it's located, obviously if it's in a more remote area where the trend of development doesn't necessarily exist, then you may not see a lot of homes pop up immediately afterwards. But we've seen and studied solar arrays that exist both in fairly dense suburban areas as well as exurbs and more agricultural communities. But what we're not seeing, we're hearing from many market participants that is dissuading individuals from building or making additional housing nearby.
Do people generally ask to look at homes or buy homes in the middle of an industrial solar plant?
I think people buy homes for a lot of reasons, and some of it has to do with location. You want to be near your parents, your grandparents, or near your aunt, or your uncle, and your friends. And so you look for the best fit given your own particular budget and your own lifestyle, close to where that is. Some people move for jobs and need to be located in a particular area. And I think it goes with the saying, everybody has their own preference. And so certainly there are people who are not going to prefer to live near the solar panels, but there may be buyers who do prefer it or aren't concerned about it. And I think that's what the data shows.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the room by show of hands? Yes, sir.
So my name is Andrew Huss. I'm outside of Lee. Andrew, I get that same name.
That's fine.
Yeah, triple F.
It's a great name.
So would you personally buy a property around being surrounded on all four sides? You personally?
Sure. And I've seen a lot of different parcels in a lot of different places. The first thing that a lot of people do when they buy homes, especially even in agricultural communities, you see them, build these like forts against the property lines because they don't want to look at anything. They want to look at what they want to look at. And so you see that happening. And I don't have a problem with this, especially in consideration that a lot of these solar farms will hire ranchers to bring sheep to eat a lot of the grass, which kind of cuts down on kind of the mowing that has to happen, especially in the first couple of years. And how wonderful that not only can I live next to a renewable energy source, but I could also get to see a whole bunch of sheep. I think that's pretty cool. And I wouldn't mind.
Okay. So based on that comment, so the sheep that are being brought in by these ranchers, would they more than likely mow down all the grass so then there would be erosion issues?
No, I think they eat the grass to control the grass, and I'm not a herbologist or an environmental person, but from the best of what I can understand is that the sheep are there to help graze, and so they graze the grass that needs to be trimmed down to keep it below the height of the panels, and at the same time they're helping the land itself grow fallow over time, and rejuvenating it from where it may have been just strictly row crops for a long time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else in the room before I turn to the Zoomers? Okay, Zoomers.
Questions, raise your hand. Okay, Sharon Benefield.
Yeah, you had said something that, you had
Wait a minute,
spoken
Sharon,
to some of the
Sharon,
homeowners in this project.
Sharon, stop.
How many did you speak to?
Sharon, if we know your name, but would you state it and what community you consider yourself living in?
Sure. Sharon Benefield, and I live in Stewart.
Okay, now I'll ask your question to Mr. Lyons.
You had said that you spoke to some of the homeowners in this project area. How many did you speak with?
I did not speak to residents in the project area.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said something that you did.
I spoke to residents who live around solar now. So in some of the different solar impact studies that we've done across the country, I've had the chance to ring doorbells and ask, hey, does this bother you? Was it an issue when you bought the house? Was it here when you moved in? So different residents across the country.
Okay, and how many residents do live in this project area? Do you know?
Oh, that is a good question. I remember going through the KMZ file with Hexagon when they first asked me to prepare an impact study, and I want to say I saw at least 50 to 60 different residents, generally around the project area.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it, then, Sharon?
Yes.
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. Elliot Huss?
Hello. My name is Ellie Huss. I'm in Lee. So you mentioned several times you struggled to find comparable studies. Is that correct?
I didn't say I struggled to find them. I said that the very, very large ones are in areas that I didn't necessarily believe were comparable, or didn't have the amount of data that was necessary for us to utilize them as a specific study.
Does that mean that the very large ones comparable to this project didn't have homes of this magnitude inside the project, or that those homes had just not sold?
The one that I mentioned earlier, the Topaz Solar, literally doesn't have a single house immediately adjacent to it. There's a subdivision that's located about 10 or 15 miles south of it. And then there were others where we thought we found a couple homes, but when we went to investigate them, they didn't sell, or just weren't transactions that we could use. It's not an easy job. It gets really frustrating from time to time.
Okay. Were there outliers in the data that you did present tonight as comparables? Were there outliers that you did remove?
Yeah, from study to study, we're going to find some transactions that we can use. I know there was one in Indiana that was next to the Indy Solar Farm, where there was a transaction because there was a small 2-acre house that was part of a larger 40-acre tract that was actually sold to develop the solar. And then that particular sale had gone on to be placed under a land contract for what we believe is a related party to the original seller. The land contract lasted 3 years, and then it sold to the market for a lower amount. And so when we investigated it, it appears that the assessor had marked the sale as not a market transaction. And so we had to remove it from our study, even though it was adjacent.
And even though it did sell on the market and not through a related party?
We were not able to verify whether or not it was a related party. We believe that it was, and we used all the efforts we could, but I'm not going to put data in my study that isn't fully verified.
In your study, you did display one that did have a negative impact. Is that the only sample that you have found with a negative impact?
That's one of them. I wanted to say in the 25 or 30 that we've done, I think there's maybe been one other that had a small negative. And when I say small negative, within 5%. But what we're not seeing is a consistent negative impact with all of the studies that we found.
Okay. So given that the studies that you were able to present are much smaller in scale, and you've drawn a positive conclusion about property evaluations, correct?
Yes.
Would it also be possible to conclude that due to the limited data, the impact is actually unknown, not that the impact is not negative?
No, because then I wouldn't have county assessors and individuals in the market that we've discussed also confirm our results. Not only that, but you have multiple others, county assessors, other appraisers who've done very similar work and also have found very comparable results.
Of those assessors that you've contacted, have you contacted assessors that are local within Lee County?
Yeah, we've talked to Illinois assessors. And
inside of Lee County.
We have talked to individual Lee County. We talked to Lee County individuals about wind for obvious reasons, and we conducted an impact study of wind turbines in Lee County, and there isn't a fear from the assessors that we've spoken to.
So you actually spoke with Lee County assessors, not the Lee County assessor, but assessors inside of Lee County regarding the solar project. Not wind.
That's a good question. It's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. If you ask your next question, because I know that you have more, let me see if I can identify that number.
And any of the other assessors that you've spoken with nationwide, you have not heard any assessor in their estimations to say they have appraised a property or would suspect to appraise a property with a lesser evaluation due to solar?
The ones that we've spoken to have not indicated that they've seen any negative impact is caused by solar. There was a study that was done at the University of Texas, and that study did a geospatial analysis, which helped prove that solar developers like to be in remote areas where there's inexpensive wind away from residents. And the second half of that study was a survey that they had conducted via email of other assessors. Of the 440 that they had sent out, I think they had a response of about 10%, so about 40 assessors. And of the assessors that responded to their email, and you can look this up, 90% of them did not believe that there was an impact that's directly caused by solar. A couple that did not have any solar in their actual districts responded that they thought there could be, but that they also knew that they didn't have any data to support that. So based on the market interviews that we've done, we concluded that we don't think assessors who have solar in their areas believe that there's a negative impact.
Referencing that study, there were assessors referenced in that study that had assessed inside of solar districts that did find negative valuations, correct?
No, I don't believe that that's accurate. At least that's not my memory of the study.
Okay. If they had responded that they had done this assessment near solar, was there a differentiation in the negative impact between small size solar and utility size solar?
I don't remember that being a question in that particular study.
You don't believe the study studied the different megawatts of solar between 1.5 megawatts, 20 megawatts, and 102 megawatts?
You're cajoling my memory, so that is, if that is the case, then they may have responded to that.
Okay. So if respondents in that study had studied solar and responded that there was a negative impact to large-scale solars in relation to residences, how did that not get included in a presentation?
Again, our assessment of that particular analysis was that most of the respondents that had solar in their counties did not see negative influence, and that is confirmed by all of the interviews that we conducted. All the interviews and all the persons that we spoke with are within the back of our report. It takes 3 pages.
Okay, and in that report, there are people that you have spoke to inside of Lee County or not?
Yeah, I'm looking in here and, Lee County we did for the wind, but not for the solar. We spoke with Vicki Crouch, who's the township assessor in LaSalle County. That's the one with the brand new solar farm. Spoke with Ken Crowley, Rockford Township assessor in Winnebago County. That's the one with the Rockford solar farm, as I previously mentioned.
So you did speak with people inside of Illinois, just not specifically Lee County?
That's correct.
And that was in regards to solar, not just wind?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you for your time.
Good, thank you. All right, I'm looking for more Zoomers with hands up. Give you a few seconds here to punch your cursor or punch your keypad. There's one, Terry Whittick. Can you hear me, Terry? You need to unmute her, Alex.
I'm working on it.
Oh, sorry.
Am I unmuted now?
You are unmuted now.
Terry Whittick, Lee, Illinois. I just have one question of the speaker this evening. I would like his highest truth. should he be living in his home, the home that he lives in that exists today, and a 600 megawatt solar farm came to be next to him, would he want to live next door to it?
The highest truth, yes. And the reason is that they make great neighbors. They don't throw parties. They don't throw something. They don't throw anything.
Gary asked the question. Let him answer. Gary, Ms. Boydick, you asked the question. Let him answer the question.
Sorry.
It's okay. I understand that anyone who has a new development going up next to them, that they're concerned, and that's the right for every human being who lives in this great country.
Well, let's not give a speech. Let's just, now you answer the question.
I don't have any problems with living next to a large civil development.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it, apparently. Another 10 seconds for Zoomers to raise their hand. All right, that concludes, and Mr. Lyons, you may quote unquote step down. And that will conclude, it's 10 after 9, we'll conclude for this evening. There was some talk about picking up tomorrow night, but I've been convinced that we'll stick with the available dates we announced first, and that is we will recess tonight's session until Thursday. That's 48 hours from now, or 46 hours from now. Here at the old Lee County Courthouse, beginning of Thursday the 22nd. Have a good one, everybody. Stay safe. Hopefully it's not snowing outside when you leave.